Eric Carter had always lived by design. As a renowned architect, he navigated life with the same precision that he brought to every blueprint and construction project. Each day, he reveled in transforming blank canvases into visionary structures, his mind alive with the interplay of light, shadow, and form. His reputation was built not only on technical brilliance but on an unwavering belief that every aspect of life could, and should, be meticulously planned. On that fateful evening, after a particularly successful presentation to a group of investors, Eric set out on his familiar route home. The city around him was a blend of dazzling neon and the gentle hum of late-night traffic. He preferred to walk, savoring the cool night air that always seemed to stir new ideas in his brilliant mind. As he strolled down the busy street, thoughts of his latest project, a sleek residential complex designed to merge modernity with warmth, mingled with memories of previous successes. The details of every project were etched in his memory, and each step was a reflection of his commitment to excellence. Lost in thought, he barely registered the changing rhythm of the traffic signal. For Eric, the world was a series of harmonious patterns and predictable events. That was until an unexpected flash of light shattered his calm routine. In one heart-stopping moment, headlights blazed into view, the blaring of a horn, the rapid screech of tires, and then, an impact so violent that it threw him onto the unforgiving pavement. Time seemed to slow as Eric's world spiraled into chaos. The vibrant life he had so carefully orchestrated shattered into a cacophony of noise and pain. The sensation of weightlessness was followed by a jarring collision with the hard ground. A surge of searing agony exploded through his body, and in that instant his inner world, the meticulous designs, the grand dreams, began to crumble. Amid the chaos, voices and the cacophonous din of sirens merged with the rhythmic pounding of his heart. In that suspended moment, Eric's brilliant mind could not fathom what had just transpired. His entire life had been built on clarity of vision and control, and now everything was slipping away in a maelstrom of disorientation and physical agony. The darkened silhouettes of onlookers blurred around him as emergency services rushed to the scene. In the midst of flashing lights and urgent voices, Eric's consciousness began its slow, reluctant ascent back to awareness. Every breath felt like a monumental effort, every heartbeat a stark reminder that something had irrevocably changed. The image of his future, a tapestry of carefully planned projects, milestones and triumphs, began to fade into a distant echo, replaced by the raw, unfiltered reality of pain and uncertainty. Even as paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, a profound sense of disbelief settled over him. How could the life he had so perfectly designed be undone in an instant? The crash not only threatened his physical well-being, but also loomed ominously over the very essence of his identity. The architect who saw beauty and order in every detail now found himself on the brink of losing his most treasured gift, his sight. In that moment of vulnerable confusion, the world around Eric transformed from an organized sequence of light and color into a terrifying unknown. The once familiar street became a blur of sounds, the comforting cadence of his footsteps now accompanied by the urgent clamor of sirens and the muffled voices of strangers. This was the beginning of a long, uncertain journey, one that would test every fiber of his determination and reshape his destiny forever. Eric's awakening was shrouded in an overwhelming haze, a place where pain and disorientation reigned supreme. When his eyelids finally fluttered open, he expected the harsh glare of hospital lights to assault his vision. Instead, he was greeted by an enveloping void. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, the absence of light felt like a tangible barrier, isolating him from the world he once knew so vividly. Every sensation was heightened, the metallic tang of antiseptic mixed with a lingering scent of blood, while the persistent beeping of machines underscored his fragile existence. Eric's mind struggled to reconcile the reality of his injury with the vivid world he had taken for granted. His thoughts darted between moments of clarity and overwhelming uncertainty. Where am I? He wondered, each heartbeat a reminder that he was alive, yet irrevocably changed. A gentle voice finally broke through the disarray. A nurse, her tone soft and reassuring, explained that he had suffered a traumatic brain injury. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. Damage to the optic nerve and visual cortex was the cause of his sudden blindness. They spoke of swelling, of time and careful observation, of the small possibility that his sight might return. Yet for Eric, each word deepened the abyss of disbelief and despair. The concept of a future without sight was inconceivable to him. For an architect whose career had been defined by his ability to see the grand designs hidden within chaos, the loss was not merely physical, it was existential. He had built his life on the premise that every structure, every moment, could be envisioned and controlled. Now, The absence of light rendered everything uncertain. Each detail of his world, once so intricately understood, was lost in darkness. In those first agonizing days, Eric's mind teetered on the edge of panic and numbness. He would lie in bed, eyes open in defiance of the darkness, clinging to the desperate hope that his vision would somehow flicker back to life. The hospital room, with its monotonous sounds and sterile atmosphere, became both his sanctuary and his prison. The incessant beeping of the monitors was a constant reminder of the fragility of his condition. Friends and colleagues visited, their voices heavy with a mix of pity and apprehension. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to shatter the delicate hope he held on to. But their well-intentioned words felt like fragile glass, too brittle to mend the broken shards of his reality. Even his sister, Claire, tried to be a beacon of support, offering encouragement with a blend of fierce determination and tender love. Yet the more they spoke, the more Eric felt that their words were aimed at someone else, a man who had lost the gift of sight, and with it, his very identity. Within the confines of that bleak room, a relentless internal battle raged. Eric's mind was a battlefield between stubborn denial and the creeping realization that his life had taken an irreversible turn. The loss of sight was not simply a medical condition, it was an existential crisis that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his being. In that overwhelming darkness, every second stretched out as a painful reminder of what he had lost, a future filled with creativity, success, and the beauty of a world seen through clear, confident eyes. In the days that followed, Eric sank deeper into an abyss of despair. The sterile hospital room became a microcosm of his isolation, a place where every sound and shadow seemed to amplify the emptiness he felt inside. His once confident voice now faltered under the weight of overwhelming uncertainty, and each passing moment reminded him of the life that had been so abruptly torn away. Eric's inner turmoil was compounded by the well-meaning but distant visits from friends and colleagues. They arrived with cautious smiles and sympathetic words, but to him, their expressions were laced with pity. They treated him as if he were fragile, an object to be carefully handled rather than the brilliant architect he once was. Their conversations, filled with rehashed memories of past successes and vague reassurances for the future, only deepened the chasm between his former self and the present reality. His sister Claire was the only one who dared to breach that chasm with unflinching candor. In her visits, she spoke not with saccharine optimism but with the unvarnished truth. "Don't give up, Eric," she insisted, her tone firm and unwavering. "You är most stupon personino. If anyone can overcome this, it's you." Yet even her words, so filled with conviction, seemed to bounce off the impenetrable wall of his despair. Every day became a relentless struggle against the encroaching darkness, not only the absence of physical light but the overwhelming shadow of loss that crept into every corner of his mind. Eric refused to acknowledge his new reality, clinging desperately to the hope that one day, his vision might be restored. He spent countless hours lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if willing it to reveal a hidden sign of recovery. But the silence remained, heavy and unyielding. The routines of hospital life, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the sterile aroma of antiseptic, the constant hum of whispered conversations outside his door, gradually eroded the remnants of his former confidence. With each passing day, Eric felt less like the master of his own destiny and more like a shadow of the man he used to be. His passion for architecture, once a vibrant force that drove him forward, now lay dormant beneath layers of grief and frustration. Isolation became his constant companion. The world outside, with its promise of color, movement, and light, was now inaccessible, a distant dream that felt both tantalizing and cruel. Eric's mind, once brimming with grand designs and innovative visions, now revolved around a single haunting question: what did the future hold for a man who could no longer see? The hours melted into days, each one a painful reminder of all that he had lost. The very skills that had defined his career, his ability to imagine, to create, to see beyond the ordinary, were now shrouded in an impenetrable darkness. In this new existence, the boundaries between time and space blurred, leaving him trapped in a monotonous cycle of despair. Yet even as the isolation threatened to swallow him whole, a small flickering ember of defiance remained. Deep within, a part of him clung to the possibility that there might still be a way to reclaim the life he once knew, a possibility that would soon be ignited by an unexpected presence in the darkness. When the monotony of despair seemed insurmountable, an unexpected presence quietly entered Eric's world. One unremarkable afternoon, as he lay silently in his hospital bed, the door creaked open and a soft, assured voice broke the stillness. "Eric Carter?" the voice asked gently. It was Nyla, a woman whose calm confidence and unassuming manner offered an immediate contrast to the barrage of pity and well-meaning platitudes that had so far filled his days. Nyla didn't come with the typical fanfare of a doctor or therapist. Instead, she carried with her a quiet resolve and an air of genuine empathy. "My name is Nyla," she introduced herself, her tone neither patronizing nor overly optimistic. There was no promise of quick fixes or miraculous recoveries in her words, only a steady, grounded intention to help Eric navigate this unfamiliar terrain. For Eric, whose identity had been so intrinsically linked to the gift of sight, her arrival was both unexpected and unsettling. At first, Eric regarded her presence with suspicion. He had grown accustomed to solitude and the resigned acceptance of his condition. The frequent visits from doctors and well-meaning acquaintances had taught him that sympathy was often just a prelude to a barrage of empty reassurances. But Nyla was different. There was a directness to her that bypassed the usual layers of condescension. She did not waste time on small talk or platitudes. Instead, she offered a simple truth. She was there to help him rediscover the world, not as it once was, but as it could be, through new methods, new senses, and a renewed sense of self. Nyla explained that she specialized in helping people adjust to vision loss. She had seen many navigate the daunting path of rediscovery after such a life-altering event, and her experience lent her words a weight that Eric could not ignore. She did not promise miracles, only that with patience, determination, and a willingness to explore alternate ways of perceiving the world, progress was possible. In a voice that was both calming and resolute, she outlined a series of simple exercises aimed at sharpening his other senses. "Today, let's focus on sound," she suggested, her words measured and precise. Despite his initial reluctance, Eric found himself drawn to Nyla's steady presence. The frustration and anger that had defined his early days of recovery slowly began to yield to a tentative curiosity. Perhaps, he thought, the darkness wasn't as impenetrable as it seemed. As Nyla prepared to leave that day, she didn't push him to engage in forced conversation or fill the silence with empty words. Instead, she simply said, "I'll be back tomorrow." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a spark of hope in the cavernous silence of his new reality. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Eric's mind stirred with the possibility of change. The voice that had entered his life was not that of pity or condescension, it was a beacon of genuine understanding. Though the darkness still reigned outside his closed eyes, within him a slow, deliberate process of awakening had begun, a process that promised to redefine everything he thought he knew about himself, his career, and the very nature of seeing. As the days passed and Nyla returned each morning with gentle encouragement, Eric found himself at the threshold of a tentative new beginning. Every visit from her felt like a small step away from the overwhelming isolation that had consumed him. Nyla's approach was refreshingly practical. She didn't focus on what Eric had lost, but rather on what he could still achieve. "Today we'll work with textures," she explained softly, laying out a series of exercises designed to sharpen his tactile senses and reconnect him with the physical world in ways he'd never considered before. Eric's initial attempts were clumsy. His hands, once so precise in drafting fine details on blueprints, fumbled with everyday objects. Yet, with Nyla's calm, patient guidance, he began to discern subtle differences in fabric, the varying contours of everyday items, and even the delicate vibrations of sound that marked the approach of footsteps in the corridor. Each small success was a victory, a step toward reclaiming a life that he had feared was slipping irretrievably away. In those moments of focused practice, Eric's inner turmoil quieted. The oppressive weight of his previous despair began to ease, replaced by a burgeoning sense of possibility. As Nyla gently corrected his grip or described the feeling of a well-crafted piece of furniture, her voice became a constant, grounding presence. It was as if she were slowly, methodically piecing together a new way for him to experience the world, a world that, though stripped of its once familiar colors, still held infinite depth and nuance. Outside the sterile confines of his hospital room, Eric's mind wandered to memories of his past creations, the soaring lines of his designs and the graceful interplay of shadow and light in his projects. He recalled the countless hours spent lost in the artistry of architecture, where every detail mattered and every moment was an opportunity to create something breathtaking. That creative fire had dimmed in the wake of his blindness, replaced by a pervasive sense of loss. But now, under Nyla's guidance, that fire flickered uncertainly back to life. In a quiet, almost imperceptible way, Eric began to re-engage with the world. The sound of a distant conversation, the rustle of leaves outside the window, and even the rhythmic hum of hospital life, All of these became cues in a sensory tapestry that he was gradually learning to appreciate. Nyla's method was not about forcing him to see with his eyes, but to open his other senses to a richness he had long neglected. With each exercise, Eric discovered a new facet of himself, a resilience and adaptability that had been buried beneath layers of frustration and sorrow. The breakthrough was subtle at first, a moment when he could distinguish the soft murmur of a nurse's footsteps from the clink of a metal tray, or when the unique texture of a blanket sparked a memory of warmth and home. Each success, no matter how small, built upon the last, creating a foundation of hope in a realm that had once seemed entirely uncharted. In the quiet hours after Nyla's visits, Eric would replay the lessons in his mind, committing every detail to memory as if they were blueprints for a future that was still uncertain but undeniably within reach. That first step forward was not dramatic or overtly triumphant. It was, instead, a series of small, measured victories. And as Eric lay in bed each night, the oppressive darkness around him seemed a little less impenetrable, replaced by the steady glow of a determination that had long been dormant. In the gentle cadence of Nyla's voice and the deliberate pace of her guidance, he began to understand that while he might never see the world as he once had, he could still create a new vision. A vision built not on sight alone but on the full spectrum of his senses and the enduring strength of his will. In the weeks that followed, Eric's daily routine began to shift in ways he never imagined possible. With Nyla's unwavering support, he embraced a new method of perceiving the world, one that relied on touch, sound, and even the subtle shifts in air pressure rather than conventional sight. Each morning, as the soft echo of Nyla's footsteps approached his door, he steeled himself for a session that promised both challenge and possibility. "Today, we'll work on identifying shapes and objects by touch," Nyla would say, her voice gentle but imbued with quiet authority. Eric's initial attempts were fraught with uncertainty. The objects laid out before him seemed like alien artifacts from another life, a set of textured blocks, a variety of utensils, even pieces of fabric that differed in weight and pattern. However, with every passing day, he began to notice patterns and subtle differences that he had never before considered. Under Nyla's tutelage, his fingertips became his new eyes. Slowly, he learned to distinguish the raised contours of a ceramic mug from the smooth curvature of a glass vase, to differentiate the intricate weave of a sweater from the coarse texture of a hand-woven tapestry. The process was laborious and, at times, deeply frustrating. Moments of failure were intermingled with sparks of small triumphs, each one serving as a reminder that he was still capable of learning, of adapting, of rebuilding a sense of self. Nyla's encouragement was never forced or overly optimistic. It was a steady stream of pragmatic advice and genuine empathy. "Your hands remember what your eyes once saw," she remarked during one session, her tone both reassuring and matter-of-fact. With each gentle correction, she guided him to refine his technique, teaching him to explore the subtle differences in texture, temperature, and form. As Eric immersed himself in this tactile world, memories of his past flooded back. He recalled the meticulous care with which he had once drafted every line on paper, every shadow and highlight that brought his architectural visions to life. Now, as his hands traced the contours of everyday objects, those same instincts, once channeled through a visual medium, began to re-emerge in a different form. He started to perceive the world as a composition of sensations, a symphony of touch, sound, and even scent that painted a picture more complex than mere color and light could ever offer. Outside the confines of his hospital room, even the mundane became extraordinary. The soft patter of rain against the window transformed into a rhythmic lullaby. The distant murmur of voices in the corridor became a chorus of life that he could almost see through its sound. With Nyla's help, Eric began to reconstruct his understanding of his environment. Every object he touched, every sound he discerned, slowly pieced together a map of his surroundings, one that was far richer and more nuanced than the world he had known before his accident. The more he practiced, the more Eric realized that he was no longer confined to the darkness. Instead, he was learning to see with his other senses, building a new foundation upon which to recreate the beauty and order of his life. Nyla became both guide and companion in this uncharted territory, a living reminder that progress was not measured solely by the restoration of sight, but by the willingness to adapt and grow. Each session ended with a quiet moment of reflection. In the silence that followed their exercises, Eric's thoughts drifted back to his former life, a life defined by sharp lines and clear horizons, and then to his present, where every sensation was a discovery. Though the journey was far from over, these small victories ignited a spark of hope that glowed steadily even in the deepest darkness. And as he drifted off to sleep each night, Eric began to believe that perhaps this new way of seeing could lead him not just back to who he once was, but to something even more profound. As Eric's sessions with Nyla continued, an unexpected intimacy began to blossom between them. Their daily interactions evolved from strictly structured exercises into conversations that straddled the line between professional guidance and personal connection. Each visit, Nyla arrived at the same quiet hour, her voice and presence gradually transforming from a mere guide into a constant source of comfort amid the darkness that had once defined Eric's existence. One late afternoon, as the soft hum of hospital machinery filled the background, Nyla and Eric found themselves engaged in an unguarded conversation. While practicing an exercise designed to help him identify objects by weight and texture, Eric's curiosity got the better of him. "How did you come to work with people like me?" he asked hesitantly, his tone betraying a longing for understanding beyond the clinical. Nyla paused, her measured response revealing a glimpse into her own history, a tale of resilience, loss, and ultimately hope. "I once lost something dear to me," she confided softly, "and I learned that sometimes, the darkness we fear is not the end, but the beginning of a new way to experience life." Her admission resonated deeply with Eric, who had long been entrenched in despair. In that moment, the boundaries between patient and guide blurred, and the shared vulnerability forged an unspoken bond. Their conversations soon meandered beyond the technicalities of sensory training. They discussed their passions, their fears, and even their most cherished dreams. For Eric, whose world had been reduced to echoes and touches, Nyla's voice became a beacon, a symbol of a life that could be rebuilt, one small piece at a time. Nyla's presence was both comforting and challenging. While she provided gentle encouragement during exercises, she also pushed Eric to question the limits he had unknowingly imposed upon himself. One evening, as the two sat quietly after a particularly arduous session, she remarked, "You once designed spaces that were both functional and inspiring. What if, in this new way of seeing, you could create something entirely unexpected?" Her words sparked a tentative excitement in him, a rekindling of that long-dormant creative fire. In the solitude of his mind, Eric began to entertain the possibility that his gift for design might not be lost after all, it could be transformed. Yet, as their connection deepened, so did the complexity of their emotions. There were moments when Eric sensed an undeniable pull, a magnetic attraction that transcended the professional boundaries they had initially set. In the quiet interludes between exercises, he found himself lingering on the sound of Nyla's laughter or the gentle cadence of her voice. Even though he could not see her, every word and every inflection painted an image more vivid than any visual could convey. It was a connection built on trust, resilience, and the shared challenge of confronting the unknown. Despite the growing intimacy, Eric wrestled with conflicting emotions. A part of him was wary, afraid to let his guard down and risk the heartbreak he feared might come from trusting someone in his vulnerable state. But another part, the part that still believed in the possibility of renewal, welcomed the connection wholeheartedly. The daily sessions had transformed from simple exercises in adaptation to profound lessons in rediscovery, lessons that extended far beyond the confines of physical training. By the time another week had passed, Eric no longer saw Nyla solely as his guide. In the gentle cadence of her speech, the careful way she navigated around his uncertainties, and the unspoken promise in every visit, he sensed something more, a budding relationship built on mutual respect and a shared journey toward healing. And as the soft glow of dusk filtered through the hospital window, Eric allowed himself a quiet moment of hope. Perhaps this connection was not just a temporary salve for his wounded soul, but the start of something that could redefine his very existence. In the months that followed, Eric's newfound reliance on Nyla deepened into an unanticipated emotional intimacy. Every day, as her steady footsteps approached his door and her gentle voice filled the room, he found himself drawn to her in ways he had never imagined possible. Despite the absence of visual cues, the contours of her personality, the timbre of her laughter, and the subtle rhythm of her speech painted a picture in his mind that was as vivid as any color he had ever known. At first, Eric tried to rationalize the stirring of emotions within him. How could he fall for someone he had never seen? Yet, as each day passed, the undeniable warmth of her presence began to erode the last remnants of the cold isolation that had defined his post-accident life. In the quiet intervals between sensory exercises, their conversations meandered into personal territories. She spoke of her own journey, a tale marked by loss, resilience, and ultimately, a hard-won acceptance of life's unpredictable turns. With every shared secret and heartfelt confession, Eric's defenses crumbled further. The growing connection was not without its challenges. Eric, whose life had once revolved around logic and measured precision, now found himself adrift in a sea of emotions. The vulnerability of his situation left him uncertain, yet irresistibly drawn to the gentle assurance that Nyla provided. Her unwavering support was a constant reminder that despite his blindness, there was still a way to experience beauty, to feel cherished, and to love without the confines of sight. One particularly quiet evening, as the hospital corridors softened into a background murmur, Eric dared to ask, "Have you ever been in love?" The question, simple yet profound, hung between them like a fragile secret. Nyla's response was measured, thoughtful. "I believe love finds us in the most unexpected places," she said softly, her tone laced with both wistfulness and hope. That moment, delicate and powerful, marked the point at which Eric realized that his feelings for her were not merely the result of shared hardship. They were genuine, profound, and transforming his entire outlook on life. Despite the lingering uncertainty of their future together, Eric embraced this tender vulnerability. Even though he had never laid eyes on her face, he could sense the kindness in her voice and the strength in her presence. In the quiet of his recovery, the gentle sound of her laughter became his most cherished melody, a tune that resonated deep within his soul, igniting a spark of hope that had lain dormant for far too long. In the solitude of his moments of introspection, Eric began to redefine what it meant to see. No longer was it solely about the physical act of perceiving light and color, it was about perceiving the essence of a person, the subtle energies that connected them, and the shared moments that transcended conventional boundaries. With each conversation, each shared silence, the idea of love without sight took on new meaning. It became a connection of spirit, a bond forged in the crucible of adversity and nurtured by understanding and empathy. As his feelings deepened, Eric found himself both terrified and exhilarated by the prospect of opening his heart completely. The thought of vulnerability was daunting, a risk he had once meticulously avoided, but the warmth of Nyla's presence dispelled his fears bit by bit. In the gentle cadence of her every word, he sensed the promise of a future that defied the limitations of his condition, a future where love could flourish in the absence of visual cues, anchored instead in the power of emotion, trust, and a shared journey toward healing. With every passing day, the realization that life could be transformed, even in the face of overwhelming loss, became clearer to Eric. The emotional terrain he had navigated since his accident had led him to a crossroads, to remain shackled by despair or to dare to embrace the possibility of a future rebuilt on trust, hope, and a newfound vision of love. The turning point came unexpectedly one quiet morning, when during a routine session with Nyla, a sudden surge of determination took hold of him, a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. As Nyla guided him through an exercise in recognizing everyday objects by their weight and texture, Eric's mind drifted back to his days as an architect. In those moments, he had wielded his gift for design with a confident flair that had defined his identity. Now, stripped of the physical gift of sight, he was forced to reimagine his entire existence. Yet rather than resigning himself to the darkness, he began to see that this challenge offered a unique opportunity, a chance to rebuild himself from the ground up, integrating the raw strength of his past with the emerging insights of his present. In the quiet solitude of that morning, Eric resolved to reclaim his future. He sought to transform his pain into purpose and his loss into a catalyst for growth. He decided that he would not let the darkness define him. Instead, he would forge a new path, one that honored his past achievements while embracing the unknown potential of what lay ahead. With a newfound clarity, he confided in his sister Claire over the phone, a conversation that, despite her own apprehensions, brimmed with heartfelt support. Claire, ever the pragmatic force in his life, encouraged him to consider every possibility, including the idea of re-entering the world of design in some form. That same day, with Claire's gentle persuasion, Eric visited a small, modest jewelry shop, a place that symbolized the delicate balance between beauty and resilience. There, amidst a collection of intricately crafted rings, he began to see a reflection of his own journey, a desire for transformation that was both fragile and unyielding. In a moment of uncharacteristic boldness, he selected a ring that exuded simplicity and elegance, a piece that spoke to him of hope, commitment, and the promise of a future that, while uncertain, was filled with endless possibility. Later, as the day waned and the hospital corridors grew quiet, Eric gathered his courage to share his decision with Nyla. Their conversation, gentle yet profound, was imbued with an energy that transcended their daily routines. In a voice steady with resolve, he told her, "I've decided to build a future that is not defined by what I've lost, but by what I can still create. And that future, I want you to be a part of it." His words, simple yet laden with sincerity, hung in the air as both a declaration and an invitation. Nyla's reaction was measured, a soft smile in her tone and a pause that spoke volumes before she finally replied, "Eric, that means more to me than you can imagine." That day marked a turning point. Eric's decision was not just about reclaiming his identity as an architect, it was about embracing the full spectrum of life's possibilities, even in the face of loss. It was a decision to allow love, in all its unexpected forms, to guide him toward a future where hope and creativity could flourish. As the echoes of his resolve faded into the quiet of the night, Eric felt a spark, a renewed belief that the darkness did not have the final say in his story, that light, in some new and unfamiliar form, was already on the horizon. Days turned into weeks as Eric's resolve transformed into something almost palpable. The ring he had chosen, a symbol of his commitment to a new beginning, became a talisman, a reminder that life's beauty was not confined to the physical realm of sight. One crisp afternoon, as autumn leaves danced outside the hospital's old brick facade, Eric knew that the moment had arrived. With his heart pounding in a way that belied his usual measured composure, he took a deep breath and sought out Nyla in the quiet corridors of the facility. Their meeting took place in a small, secluded lounge area, a sanctuary away from the relentless buzz of medical equipment and clinical conversations. In that intimate setting, with soft natural light filtering through partially drawn curtains, Eric reached out tentatively. "Nyla," he began, his voice trembling yet resolute, "there's something I need to ask you." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken emotions, every second stretching into an eternity. Eric's mind replayed every moment they had shared, the gentle guidance of her voice, the warmth of her presence, and the unexpected tenderness that had blossomed between them. He continued, "I want to spend the rest of my life creating beauty, not just with my hands, but with my heart. I want you by my side as I navigate this new path." His words, though simple, carried the weight of a man who had faced unimaginable darkness and emerged with a deep understanding of life's fragile, irreplaceable worth. Nyla's eyes, though unseen by Eric, seemed to sparkle with unshed tears as she listened. "But, you've never seen my face," she whispered, half in disbelief and half in wonder. Eric's smile was gentle as he replied, "Nyla, what matters is not the physical form, but the essence of who you are. I see you every day, in your voice, your compassion, and the strength you bring to my life. To me, you are the most beautiful person in the world." In that moment, the world seemed to pause. The soft murmur of distant conversations faded away as the two shared a silence that was both intimate and profoundly honest. Moved by his sincerity, Nyla reached out and pressed her forehead against his, a silent acknowledgement of the emotions swirling between them. The ring, held delicately in Eric's hand, was offered as a promise, a tangible symbol of a commitment that transcended the need for sight. "Yes," she whispered, her voice laden with both joy and a hint of disbelief. "Yes, I will." And so, with hearts intertwined in a vow that spoke of hope, resilience, and a future built on trust, Eric and Nyla sealed their promise. In that quiet moment of mutual understanding, all the fears and uncertainties of the past melted away. The proposal was not just a promise for a shared life, but an affirmation that even in the midst of darkness, love could illuminate the path forward. It was a declaration that the future, however unpredictable, held the potential for beauty far beyond the confines of what had been lost. The day of the wedding dawned with an air of quiet anticipation, a feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. Eric had spent countless hours preparing for this day in his mind, rehearsing words and envisioning a future that defied the darkness that had once threatened to consume him. Though his eyes still held the memory of shadow and void, his heart now beat with a brightness that no lack of physical sight could diminish. Guests gathered in a warmly decorated hall, their chatter and laughter filling the space with a palpable sense of celebration. Eric stood at the altar, a mixture of nervous energy and resolute calm coursing through him. The soft strains of a string quartet drifted through the air, mingling with the gentle rustle of fabric and hushed murmurs of excitement. In that moment, every detail, the carefully chosen flowers, the elegant decor, even the subdued lighting, seemed secondary to the singular truth that this day represented a rebirth. Then, as if by destiny's design, the soft murmur of anticipation turned into a collective hush. The doors opened slowly, and Nyla stepped forward. With each measured step, the ambient sound of her presence grew stronger, resonating deep within Eric's soul. He felt her approach like the slow unfolding of a long-awaited revelation. Although he could not see her in the conventional sense, her presence was vividly etched in his mind. The sound of her laughter, the warmth in her tone, the graceful cadence of her movements.
Es shedru closer, Eric senses heiktenet.
A subtle shift occurred. A soft glimmer of light seemed to seep into the edges of his darkness. It began as a faint flicker, a mere suggestion of color and form, but then, almost imperceptibly at first, it blossomed into something real. With each heartbeat, the blur at the edges of his perception sharpened, until in one breathtaking moment, Eric's eyes captured the undeniable outline of the woman he had come to love. Nyla stood before him, radiant and alive, her features bathed in the gentle glow of the afternoon light. Time itself seemed to pause as he took in this miraculous revelation. Every nerve in his body pulsed with emotion, a mixture of awe-relief and the overwhelming joy of rediscovery. The guests, too, fell silent, as if collectively witnessing a moment that transcended the ordinary. In that space between heartbeats, Eric's mind, which had long been shrouded in uncertainty and pain, was filled with a clarity that surpassed all he had ever known. With a trembling exhale, Eric reached out, his hand finding hers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Nyla," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I see you."
The simple words carried the weight of alle fatima of darkness overcome by a single profound moment of light.
Tears shimmered in her eyes as she responded in a quiet, trembling murmur, affirming not just his words, but the reality of their love, a love that had blossomed amidst adversity and had grown stronger with every shared struggle. That day, the wedding was not merely a celebration of a union, it was a testament to the transformative power of hope and the resilience of the human spirit. Every detail, from the gentle laughter of guests to the soft, supportive murmurs of friends and family, was imbued with the knowledge that miracles can happen when one dares to embrace the unknown. In the soft afterglow of the wedding, as the celebration slowly gave way to intimate whispers and quiet laughter, Eric and Nyla found themselves alone in a small, secluded corner of the reception hall. The night sky, vast and star-filled, stretched above them as if blessing the union of two souls who had braved unimaginable darkness to find each other. Eric's heart, once burdened by the fear of a future without light, now pulsed with an assurance that transcended the physical. He realized that true vision was not measured by the clarity of one's eyes, but by the depth of one's perception, the capacity to love, and the courage to trust. As they sat side by side, the gentle strains of distant music and the soft murmur of celebration became a comforting background, a reminder that the world, though changed, was still full of wonder. Eric recalled the long, arduous days of recovery, the countless hours spent navigating a life he no longer recognized. Now, with Nyla's unwavering support and the memory of that miraculous wedding day, he understood that every hardship had led him to this profound moment of transformation. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, a mixture of tender reminiscences and quiet dreams for the future. Eric spoke of his plans to rebuild his career, not as the architect of grand structures, but as a designer of spaces that fostered connection and healing. He envisioned a future where his work would reflect the new way he had learned to see, through the interplay of sound, touch, and the emotions that lay behind every encounter. Nyla listened, her voice soft and encouraging, as she shared her own hopes and the lessons she had learned from her past. In her words, Eric found the courage to embrace a future that was uncertain yet brimming with potential. As the night deepened, so too did their bond. The lingering glow of the evening was not merely the result of the day's celebrations, but of a love that had grown in the absence of sight and thrived in the fullness of emotion. Eric's hand, still warm in Nyla's, was a tangible reminder that love could flourish even when the world was cloaked in darkness. In that quiet corner, free from the watchful eyes of the world, they allowed themselves to dream without reservation. Every whispered word, every shared silence was a promise, a pledge to face the unknown together, to redefine the meaning of beauty and connection on their own terms. For the first time in his life, Eric no longer feared the unknown. He had discovered that the most profound light often emerges from within, ignited by the courage to love despite loss, and nurtured by the trust that the future holds infinite possibilities. As he pressed his cheek gently against Nyla's, he silently vowed that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would confront them hand in hand. In that embrace, in the shared warmth of a love that transcended the need for physical sight, Eric realized that he had not only regained his ability to see, but had also discovered a deeper, more enduring vision, the vision of a life reimagined, a future built on hope, and a love that would guide him through every shadow that might ever come his way. And so, beneath a star-scattered sky, with the echoes of the celebration still lingering in the air, Eric and Nyla embarked on a new chapter, a journey where every moment, every touch, and every whispered word was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love beyond sight. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us create even more inspiring content. See you in the next video.